This is a tool I've almost created for myself. If you're not sure what direction to take in life, then ask yourself the question, if I had only one more year of life to live, what would I do? It's a simple principle. It's called GROW, Grow. G stands for goal, R stands for reality, O stands for options, and W stands for the way forward. Imagine that you're holding a racket. Yeah, so just go ahead and hold that. A little outward as if you're about to hit a stroke.
Forehand, yeah.
Right. Now your aim is to generate a powerful forehand. Any difference you notice on where there was more power being generated?
If you are trying to create something or develop a point of view about something, you have to get in touch with your thoughts, and silence is really the only way. If I can do more of silence and solitude in my life, I think I can do significantly better in many things that I am currently involved in. Sriram, welcome. Last time we were at ELD together, you were asking me some tough questions, so now the tables have turned, so it's my turn. But Sriram, okay, I want to start this with, so you have in some ways, very stellar and somewhat typical start to your career. Studied computer science at IIT Chennai, went to Harvard Business School, joined McKinsey, which is a highly coveted, consulting position, and things were going well. You were rising, progressing, and at some point you reached a conclusion that this is not for me. I'm going to truly take the path, the road less traveled. So when did that, what happened? Why not go for more standard, let me grow, become a partner, senior partner, or go for a CEO job somewhere and so on? Yeah, and you decide to kind of quit all of that and are doing something which is amazing but highly unconventional. So we'll talk about that, but what led you to on that path of just giving up that the road that was all set for you?
So before I answer that, I must make two corrections.
Okay.
The first is people from my institution will balk when someone says IIT Chennai and not IIT Madras.
That's right. And I'm visiting next week, so I better be, I think, rehearse it multiple times because, they will probably lynch me on the spot if I don't fix it.
So that's one. The other is I made a conscious choice when I was applying for my master's programs to not study an MBA. So I actually studied at the Harvard Kennedy School, where I studied public policy and international development. It was a deliberate choice. And part of, I think the drivers were part of what you're also alluding to. See, after my first couple of years in the professional world, my first job was McKinsey, straight out of IIT. I joined consulting because I wanted to work closely with people. And I had this odd image of my future if I continued on in the tech world, that I would be in a corner in front of a laptop all the time and what would be happening to my impact on the world. So I came to McKinsey, learned a lot, wonderful 2 years, and also I think got a taste of the luxuries of life too young, too soon. So after 2 years, I found myself asking myself again.
Which luxury did you actually like?
Which ones did I like? Well, I'll be honest, starting to drink alcohol right after college because I didn't at all through college.
You don't need to go to McKinsey for that.
But you need to go to McKinsey to earn enough money to drink often.
Drink the best ones, I guess.
Drink the best ones.
Right.
So it started there. But a year and a half into that whole journey, I played the rest of the movie out and I asked myself, okay, is this it? Like, is this, if I fast forward and scale what I've seen over the last 1.5 years, person earns more money, person becomes more prominent, has more like network, goes to more parties, etc. It was a lens I was wearing back then. That's how I was looking at the world. So I said, is that really what I want? And I quit to join a non-profit. For my next chapter. This was Pratham Education Foundation. I was probably among the first business analysts for McKinsey's BA program, which was about 8-9 years by then old in India, to join a non-profit and not VC, private equity, etc. In fact, one of my mentors called me into a room and said, "Are you in your senses? I thought you were on a clear path."
Yeah.
So I did that for a year, and I gained the courage and the conviction to say, actually, there is a life here. I'll have to find the balance, because honestly, it wasn't paying enough bills for my own needs. And that's why I chose to go to the Kennedy School. I wanted to study development economics.
Yeah.
I was considering a career in the World Bank or United Nations after Kennedy.
Yeah.
But once I got to Boston, people told me, look, for someone who's grown in a meritocratic environment like you wouldn't enjoy multilateral organizations unless you're happy getting to a reasonably impactful place when you're 65 years old. So I came back to India because at that time at Harvard, a couple of things happened. One, I rediscovered meditation, which I had left several years ago. Second, I began studying with a couple of teachers, Ronald Heifetz and Dean Williams, who I didn't know at the time, but they were leading thinkers of leadership development in the world. I had done a course with them, a fabulous course. If time permits on the session, we'll talk about it. And third, McKinsey in India was starting up its leadership institute around the same time.
Yeah.
So it made sense for me. I quite liked the work they were doing. It was inner work. I was also being called more and more to explore my own inner consciousness. I was also questioning if I even wanted to live a material life. So when I graduated from Harvard, I came back, dropped my bags in Bangalore at parents' home, took a flight to Delhi into my first Vipassana. And I remember meeting a monk there. The teacher of that program was Venerable Tony Beaumont. He was an Australian monk in his 70s. And they give you an audience of 15 minutes. It's a silent program, but the senior monk gives you an audience of 15 minutes when you can speak to them one-on-one.
Yeah.
So I took this audience. We were sitting in exactly similar position, looking out to the beautiful Himalayas. And I told him, look, I'm in a dilemma. I've led a very material life. And I don't know whether I want to become a monk or if I want to go back and continue a material life. And this was someone who had come to India in the 70s, had become a monk for 40 years. And so I told him, I have this dilemma. Tell me what to do. He looked at me very compassionately and he said, you know, I have the same dilemma every day. Not a day passes when I don't question my choice of having become a monk. And the lesson I learned from there was a couple of things. One, I mean, even someone 40 years into their practice probably has doubt. And that's the nature of doubt. It emerges in a person's mind. And the question is, how do you relate to that doubt? Do you hold on to it, make it your life and go through the struggle? Or do you notice it as a passing thought, which was easy for us to do in the Himalayas after a Vipassana? And the second thing I realized was, this is not any one answer. I could find what I was looking for, which was really just two things. One, an inner journey, and second, helping people. And I could find it on my own. I came back to McKinsey, did the generalist path for a couple of years because I wasn't ready. My mentor, Faridun at McKinsey, would keep telling me, Sriram, why don't you jump into this work? You seem quite cut out for it. I wasn't ready. I was afraid to take the leap. I thought
leadership development work.
So I wasn't ready. I kept asking myself, what is a 20-something-year-old person going to tell CEOs and leadership in companies that they probably don't already know? I don't have enough gray hair. All of these fears. And so I needed 2 more years to build up my own inner conviction. And in 2015, I took the leap. And to your question of how did that leap happen? Again, like in 2014 end, I played the movie out again. I had become a manager at McKinsey. I said, okay, I can become partner, senior partner, etc. Is that a life I want? And I often ask myself this question, if I didn't have too long to live, then what would I do with my life? And the answer definitely wasn't going down that generalist path. McKinsey was kind enough at the time to say, okay, we'll create a new track. It was called the PACE program. It's amazing that some organizations have that. They give you the time to explore your own interest while being on their payroll. And with some conditions at the end, which is we gave you 6 months to explore. at the end of this, do you want to continue this path? Are you good enough to continue this path? Have you created impact in the last 6 months? Or are we parting ways here? And so I got on that, and touch wood, everything's gone well so far. So
Amazing.
here's where I find
So in your 20s, you were clearly introspecting, seeking, twice you've used that, you played out your life story. But these are not typical 20-something traits. Alcohol is a lot more interesting than, playing out in a movie of your life and see where you end up in 10, 20 at the end of life. I mean, these are big thoughts. I guess some level, all of us are somewhat existential, but I think most people are not too much in tune with this, or they drown it out with other, distractions and engagements, and trying to build a career, trying to build a family, trying to really, at least first find the good life, and then maybe later on become disillusioned much later. So what do you attribute to, like, this, you're wired that way, some influence in your life, And the reason I'm just want to double click on that is, I personally do think that, cultivating that introspection and some awareness can help people make much, much better decisions. Because otherwise, we are all susceptible to things happening around us. We are watching other people do things. This whole mimetic desire, takes hold, and we want just what everybody else around us want. And the only antidote to that is to truly be in touch with, where your heart and your mind is at. So looks like, but you had it going plenty for you.
I love the way you phrased the question. What were the influences that led to this? Because it's easy to fool ourselves that we are doing all the work. A couple of influences, Mukesh. One, being born in the home and the place and the family that I was born at. Father, somewhat quite spiritual to begin with. Almost every day of my life that I have seen him, he's woken up in the morning and done his meditation. Mother, quite religious and very duty bound, and a largely peaceful environment with its share of Indian up and down middle class family upbringing. Second, by the time I was having these inquiries, and at least for my professional life when I made the leap, I will say I had met my now wife back then. So at some level, the relational aspect of life I could see had taken care of itself. I had just met her a couple of years before I made this leap. That's the second. The third, and you've spoken about this, we've spoken about this a couple of times, which is the contemplation of death, of one's own mortality and impermanence, and what clarity that can create for a person in their life stage. And I'm going to ask you as well about it in a moment. For me, two significant experiences. I remember when I was 12 or 13 years old, I had it's called probably a cyst, like an outgrowth in my right eye, which got everyone concerned. We went to an eye doctor, and I don't know what prompted him to say it, but he suggested that I might have a tumor in my brain. Right. Which I think was a leap from what he was seeing. But for full precaution, he said, please go take an MRI the next day. As a 12-year-old, I still remember it was December 30th of 1999 or 1998. There was also a new millennium coming in, and it was something I'd probably been excited about as a kid. But that night, I went to bed. We took the MRI next morning, and it showed immediately that there was nothing. But that night, I went to bed believing that I may not live much longer. And I remember distinctly my full 12 hours of lying on the bed that night and wondering, oh wow, like this came to an end pretty quickly. And what happens is this life, what does it mean to be alive if I'm already going to be gone? And who is this person if I'm not going to be around? So that got some inner inquiry going early on. And subsequently in Vipassana, at least the one that I did at the Buddhist monastery, the one I was mentioning, we spent a whole day contemplating death, and in deep meditations led by Venerable Tony Beaumont. And in the meditations, Buddhist tradition has this practice of doing a meditation where one is envisioning one's own demise. it can seem like gross and morbid at one level. But the invitation in the Buddhist tradition is it's a natural passage of life and it's hypothetical. This is not really happening. You've got to first stabilize the mind, do the breathing, know that this is just an inquiry. It's an analytical inquiry in the mind. And in doing that, once again, like the inquiry of, oh, this all comes to an end. And therefore, how would I spend each day if I did not know when you and I are going to be around? So it's changed the way I've looked at life, which is, and this is a tool I've almost created for myself, and I've seen you also speak about it, which is, if you're not sure what direction to take in life, then ask yourself the question, if I had only one more year of life to live, what would I do? How would I live this 1 year? That's where it comes from. I'm going to ask you the question. You've also spoken about reflecting on death and mortality. How has that come about in your life? What has it unlocked for you?
I think as you start to look into wisdom of the world, what different people have to say, this idea of, contemplation of death as a tool, it shows up again and again everywhere. Steve Jobs, used to talk about it that every day he would look himself in the mirror while shaving and ask, like, what will I do if it was last day of my life? And he says, that I'll give him crystal clarity about, there's so much corporate BS and there are, so many different things one get entangled in. And saying like that is would give him a lot of clarity. Ancient, Greeks had this phrase, memento mori. In fact, the Stoics, they popularize it. Memento mori means remember you have to die. And this was, if you read Marcus Aurelius or, they talk about it's a very inspiring thought. I think what you mentioned too in the Buddhist tradition also, in this whole book of, called Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And one part of their whole lifelong meditative practice is to prepare for how great of a monk you are is almost determined like how you face death when you get there. So I think, for me somewhere that awareness has definitely developed, I think from probably teenage year onwards. And later I've seen also it's not, at least I don't think it's morbid at all. It's some awareness of it, it can change your thinking. I think it's just the biggest advantage of this as a tool is just you get a lot of clarity. What really matters to you, what kind of issue you want to be bothered about, what kind of, issue are really not worth, your attention. When you just, what you said, you played out your life's movie. If you zoom out, say, depending on what your age is, 40 year out or 70 year out, and think about what you really care. I think I might have talked about this book also, the 5 Regrets for Dying. Now, this is amazing book. Just maybe summary of that is there was this guy who was a hospice nurse. His job was to spend, I don't know, his or her. We look it up. Remember his or her? Her. So her job was to comfort people in the last few months of their life, and they will look back about their life, and most of them had some regrets, and most of the regrets were about not being true to myself, not had the courage to live life I would have liked, try to please other people and so on. So again, that's one more input into that. The kind of things that you regret towards your last years is not the things you obsess about today. So why not marry the two? So I do think it's if one can have the stomach to engage in this idea in whatever form. Even this Stephen Covey, his book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of the biggest habits, and this I came across when I was 21. It says begin with the end in mind. The same idea, and again I have so many people from all walks of life are saying there's probably something to it. So I find it useful. This time I actually bought that coin, Memento Mori, Ryan Holiday. He has created merchandise out of all this Stoic philosophy. It was on my desk, for a longest period of time. Yeah, so Sriram, just so you got involved with leadership development at McKinsey. You did there for a few years, and somewhere you felt that that became your calling in life. You decided you would rather do this full time on your own, and become I don't know what's the best way to describe you, high performance coach or leadership coach, and you made that, you transitioned out of McKinsey and decided to commit yourself fully for the endeavor.
Yeah. And again, going back to your prompt on the influences that have brought us here, several acts of grace. In 2017, my wife and I, we got married. That was also the year that I met my teacher. Her name is Gita Bellin, for the first time. That was in October 2017. And Gita has been a significant influence in my life and continues to be so. When I met her, I had also designated what's called a senior expert within McKinsey. And as the firm does, and I feel it's a good thing, they also play the movie out for you, which is, okay, you've just become senior expert. What's your path ahead? Like, what do you want to contribute in being part of the firm for the next few years, And again, asking myself that question, I realized I actually wanted to continue my own inner work, and I wanted to invite more and more people into doing inner work, the work of self-awareness, self-inquiry, and self-reflection, because I had found that it had unlocked a lot for me. And so I wanted to bring this to more people. And so with the counsel of Gita, with the support of Anusha, my wife, I took that leap to move out of McKinsey. One funny story there, this happened, the calling or the awakening, as you were laying it out, happened when I was in a program with Gita at London. So I had flown out on Saturday and no intention to quit McKinsey, zero intention to move out. But by Monday evening, the very first day of the workshop, there had been such a profound level of clarity, like vibrating through the body, that this is now done. Like, I must leave and I must walk my own path. I decided I'm going to call the firm the next morning, but I'm not going to do that before I speak to my wife. So I called her up from London. She had, poor soul, she had no idea. We had just got married 2 months ago. She had married a McKinsey senior expert, and now calling her and telling her, hey, actually, I'm going to quit. And she said, okay. I said, no, I'm not going to do anything after this. She said, what do you mean? Like, yeah. I said, no, I'm just going to walk my path, and whatever happens will emerge along the way. She said, okay, I've known you to be crazy at times. And I told her, I won't make the call until you give me a green signal. She said, okay, I have 2 questions for you in order to do that. The first question is this coming from your heart? Because if you say yes to that, I won't attempt to rationalize it, because there's no meaning in rationalizing an action that's coming from the heart. The second question she said I have is, do we have enough money for next month? And when she asked it, when she framed it that way, it became so clear for me that there's not much that we need. And often when I'm speaking to people who are aspiring to become entrepreneurs, the big question in their mind is, how will I manage my finances? And a few tools that I've found helpful. One, arrive at your number. What is your number that satisfies a meaningful life that you want to live? And most people, when we sit down to do this exercise, no one is saying, I want 2 jumbo jets and 14 mansions and 8 Mercedes. Actually, when you sit down to do the exercise, like, I'd like that annual trip abroad. I'd like this. I'd like, throw all of that in, and there's a number. And that's not that difficult, actually, on an entrepreneurial journey. It requires some trust, a leap of faith, and some opportunities that you can start to fulfill and realize. But that's what helped me make that leap. I answered yes. I gave Anusha 2 yeses. And
so let's just further break this down. So you had a deep insight. I'll just go back to workshop also in a second. But a little bit, I think a lot of people have, with or without reflection, they have insights, aha moment, sudden burst of inspiration, or people have dreams, and but something holds you back, especially in your 20s and 30s, which one can argue is also a period of massive creativity, a lot of outstanding work that most people in the world produce are in those years. But people hold themselves back because they don't have whatever, enough bank balance or enough things to write on resume or enough network or whatnot. And you keep waiting, and then, inertia takes hold. You become, too vested in whatever path, which was not necessarily by choice, but was a default path that you were not willing to walk out of. So just thinking through the tool you're sharing is being brutally candid. Like, if I have to pursue something, I have to obviously let go of what I'm doing right now. And you need to be able to financially support yourself, which will require some means, but will not require, money that, that's your saving until retirement, something else will happen. So I think just figuring that out, what that is for you, and being very clear about that, and then using that to kind of facilitate. Because if you don't let go of the path that is, that you somehow ended up in, and don't find that courage and conviction to move out of it, whatever else, whether it's entrepreneurship or somebody, whether it's writing a book or pursuing a hobby or very different kind of profession, it just won't happen, unless you find that conviction. Let's go back to this workshop. So what happened in those 2 days that you had this, you said, vibration through the bodies? Sounds, what were you guys on?
Yeah. What were we on? Deep awareness, I suppose. So Gita has this practice, and it's something that I also have inculcated both in my coaching work and workshops, which is to have participants set intentions before they come in.
Yeah.
So there's a long questionnaire with several questions that one is meant to journal.
Yeah.
So the Sunday before this Monday, I found myself sitting and writing each of those questions down. And there's a couple of questions in there around, why are you in this workshop? What are you yearning for? What is your real intention? What is it that you want in your life right now? And I remember I had written the word clarity. That I wanted clarity. I was not clear. There was this path, there was this path, there was this path. And I really wanted clarity. And I went in with that. So the first learning and lesson for me from that exercise was setting intentions. And Gita often says, intentions create reality. Attention holds reality. And this goes back to your point of many people have the insight. And what happens is our relationship with that insight is quite turbulent initially. Like we're evaluating it, we are judging it, we are wondering like, how will this work out? A lot of our fears, our unmet needs start to show up. And therefore we are not able to hold our attention on that insight. And that's where actually having a coach or working through it with a friend or being in a workshop environment helps. Because once the mind has prepared that thought of the intention, in a workshop over that Monday, we're sitting and there's nothing else to pay attention to but to why you came there. Like your phones are off, phones are away, you're not really chatting much with people. The attention is all on oneself.
If you keep your phone away, then body starts vibrating instead of phone.
Instead of phone, exactly, right? You put your body on silent mode. So that and a combination of the retreat environment and a combination of the meditations that we did that day, and ultimately the force of one's own will also.
So I think if you don't mind, at least privately when you talk to you, I think Gita has played a huge role in your development as a person and the choices you made. Who is Gita? What does she do? And how does one get coached by her?
Yeah. One probably waits another lifetime for that to happen. She's still around and thriving. She's Gita Bellin. She was born Marguerite Bellin, British born. She's 86 years old now, going to turn 87 very soon. She was born during World War II in London. And in her late teens, she had a calling to, she was a lecturer at that time, and she had a calling to find truth, absolute truth. And so she packed up her bags with her friend at the time, and they drove from London to Kashmir.
Drove from London to Kashmir.
Drove from London to Kashmir. Because they had heard that, and this was
60s?
The 50s. This was when a lot of the teachings from India were emerging, and because of the British era here, Westerners had come in, they had gone back to Europe and North America, they had written about these experiences they had had. So they drove, and then in India, she would find her first teacher. That was in the 50s, and she spent several years with her first teacher in Kashmir. Then she would find her next teacher, and then she would travel around the world. And I remember her once saying that by grace, she has been in the right places of the world at the right times. So in India during the 50s, in California during the 60s, which was the era of experimenting alternate pathways to consciousness. In South Africa during the apartheid era, where she did a lot of work on forgiveness and helping the nation come together. So a lot of this, she then moved to Australia, and she was discovered by McKinsey in the early 2000s, by which time she was in her 60s. She had spent several decades understanding what it means to transform as a human being. And so her contribution became bringing the work from spirituality into the world of human transformation in teachable modules that the westernized mind could understand.
Yeah.
And this was perfect at the time for McKinsey in the early 2000s, because they were wanting to build a leadership practice. And so several collaborations happened, and she trained the first generation of teachers who trained the next, and I was somewhere. And the way I discovered her was, I reached out to someone in 2016 and said, if I want to continue this journey for myself, if there's one teacher in the world that I can study with, who is that person? And this person said, there's a lady called Gita. She's in Australia. We don't know when she surfaces, when she goes back into silence. But whenever she offers a program next, I'll let you know. That's how it happened.
Got it. And look, I understand she has probably, lifetime worth of, body of work. But I'm going to ask it anyway. Like, what does she teach at the core? If you can take an attempt at summarizing, and fully aware of it, summary may not be possible. But just to give, our listeners some sense of somebody like Gita, who spent 6-7 decades thinking deeply about human transformation and engaging with the world, also helping people, as you said, translating somewhat a spiritual journey in a form that a so-called Western mind can also understand and process. So, what does she do?
Okay, so I will set an intention to channel Gita's guidance here in answering that question. A couple of things. So the first is a practice called the dynamic mind practice. This is a simple relaxation practice. It was developed by her along with her teacher. It traces its roots back to Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. It's a 20-minute practice typically. There's also an app by the same name, Dynamic Mind Practice, which is free and available for anyone to download. What that relaxation and several meditation and enough research has been done on this. Meditation helps one, relax the body. Second, unwind conditioned patterns over a period if one practices it consistently, and therefore begins to transform one's personality. From, say, a person, as I was, a person who's an overthinking, somewhat anxious, self-doubting individual.
That's all of us.
Yeah, that's all of us. To finding more relaxation, finding more peace in the present moment, and being able to, as you were talking, notice the insights that are coming from our own heart and pay attention to them. So that's the first teaching, first leg of her teaching, which is the dynamic mind practice. The second leg is a body of knowledge that's, in fact, an ocean of knowledge. The early stages of that knowledge are what's called being at creative cause, being at the creative cause of life, which basically means that I am not the victim of my life experiences, no matter how difficult. And I do acknowledge that some of us go through very difficult circumstances, sometimes genuinely caused by actions from other people.
Yeah.
But at the same time, for that person who's going through that, one approach is to see this as being the victim of my circumstances, and the other is to see this as being the creator of my future life and making the choices from there. Going back to a tool that you pulled up in our conversation, which is playing the movie of your life. This is one tool that I've really liked, which comes from earlier, not from Gita, is the idea of a default future versus a created future. A default future being one where if I continue my current way of behaving, my current way of managing a team, my current way of being a leader, what does that look like? That's my default future.
Yeah.
And then asking myself, what's actually the created future that I want? So it comes from the same principle, which is core to Gita's work, which is that we are actually the creator of our life experiences, and we are attracting to us the right opportunities and experiences that are here to teach us something, and therefore to draw a lesson from both the downs of life, but also the ups of life. Does that do justice?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think the very, very powerful idea may sound simple, to articulate, but I think what you are saying, and I'll rephrasing, is first is just through, this ongoing meditation, creating that, just coming in touch with your own thoughts, and also somebody realizing that you are not your thoughts. You have the agency to acknowledge your thoughts, engage if you want to, and not engage if you don't want to. And so that you in some ways remove clutter in your head and can listen to your inner voice. Then realizing that I think all of us have enough to be pissed about. We feel like we are wronged or in wrong situation, or someone is not looking after our interests and so on, and that is a cause for so much frustration, anxiety, and so on. So again, kind of letting go of that, and some ways kind of taking control of your life, saying I am in charge. If I have that distance in my head, and I can say something's happening, but I don't need to act like a victim of those situations. And then making this leap out, saying that, do I want to create my future, or do I want it to just be bounced around by circumstances and people where I happen to be, and it will also end up being a life of some kind, but it's not a created life. It's a very, very powerful idea.
And the extension of that is yes, I am the creator of my life experiences, and from a certain state of consciousness, it feels like it's me who's doing all the work. And this is going back to the question of influences. From another perspective, which is the perspective of surrender to the vast universe that we are a part of. And this, I hope I'm doing justice to Gita's knowledge and teachings. She would say, it's not I that's creating my life. It is creating my life. And by it, we could call it consciousness, nature, the universe, pure awareness, whatever terms we may give it. There is something else there is something that we are a part of. We are very much a part of it. We are not separate from it. We are in the dance, and at the same time, there's a flow that's making things happen in a certain way. And sometimes creating one's life is just about having a feel for that flow. Where's the energy moving? And I've seen you do this very often to pick up the momentum. You speak a lot about momentum, both for businesses. I've seen you do it in your personal life also. So I'll pose a question back to you.
Yeah, I think I guess, what you're saying is that if you create that, contemplation and listen deeply, answers come to you. Now, based on, I think, your belief system, worldview, you can attribute to whatever it that, but it's, I guess, almost logical to say it's not getting created inside you. It's, it's unlikely. So I think, finding, it's also probably helps you somewhere feel connected to something larger than you. I think that brings its own sense of relief and its own sense of, gratitude. Like for me, for example, I love going to mountains and just being in front of, especially Himalayas, these, majestic mountains, and you have to feel very tiny, and tiny in a very good way. I think it makes you feel very good. And a little bit, the whole idea of ego dissolution, and you are able to come out of, just whole your own cocoon, that me, everything about me, to look at this, there is something way more than you. So I think that whole, you're trying to come in touch with that inner idea and wherever it is coming from. And I think probably all of us know too little to have, either philosophical or scientific articulation of that. But I think maybe the point to note is you can have much deeper, realizations, which can then put you in, you can make deliberate choices. So Sriram, with all your meditation practice and trying to become like something like this, where we are getting interrupted with this construction noise, does it bother you, or you're like very centered and it doesn't bother you at all? Like I'm starting to get a little worked up,
Yeah. Okay.
And don't offer me meditation right now, which I'll do when we finish. But
Yeah.
How are you processing this? The fact that we got interrupted like 3-4 times, this noise just starts in the background, in drilling noise.
So the first response was, and it almost feels like Gita's voice in my ear, which is, why did I create this? Why did I attract the noise once, twice, thrice? And then I started reflecting on, what was I saying at the time that the noise came up? Was that even the right response to your question? So it just made me reflect a little more on the question itself. That's one. And I'm also just coming back into the moment.
So Sriram, you use this phrase human transformation, and at some point you moved out from McKinsey and started working with people, emerging leaders, etc., full time, to in some ways help them transform themselves and become a better leader in the process. What does it even mean? Why do people need to go through this transformation effort? And what is your intention of, what are you trying to do with these people, which trying to make something happen, and you work with them to in some way unlock potential, perhaps their journey. So just talk about this idea of human transformation, and why does one need to work with a coach for that?
The work that I do, it's 3 disciplines, I'd say. The first is coaching, the second is facilitating, and the third is teaching. So coaching typically happens in a one-on-one format or with small teams. Facilitation happens in running workshops. And teaching is typically teaching courses like the one that we've taught together, which is ELD, or the one that we teach at IIT Madras. Now, the purpose of all of this work is to enable human transformation. And to your question of what is human transformation, first of all, what do we mean? It's basically, how do I change myself? What do I shift about either my mental view to the world or the behaviors that I'm doing today or the habits that are part of my daily routine in order to get to where I want to be. It's what I've noticed is often companies, teams, and even individuals, when we don't get the results that we want, we end up repeating more of the actions that we've already tried. Like, let's put more pressure on the team to get the results, or let's double down on the numbers. And often what's happened is that the energy has become conditioned to flow in a certain way. And to use, this line has been attributed to Einstein and a few others. If you're trying to solve a problem at the same level of consciousness that created it, then you're not going to get to the solution. So transformation is just that. It is unlearning and shifting myself as a person in order to have a better response to my current life situation, and in order to create a more clearer, surer path to where I want to go to.
But this, the people's aspirations are very different. As you mentioned, someone, let's say, I know you work with, some people who are already running an organization. Their aspiration may be, I don't know, take their company from certain market share to something else, or somebody who is trying to be, entrepreneur. What aspect do you focus on, and how does it help them make progress towards this very diversified set of goals?
Great question. What is common to all domains is human behavior. So the coaching, the school of coaching that I was trained in is called ontological coaching. Ontology comes from the Latin root hentes, which means to be. The word authentic, for example, is auto plus hentes, which is to be oneself. So ontology is the study of being. And what we are focused on is the whole being of the leader or the individual. And we are curious about what makes this person really unique, both in their inability to do a certain thing or shift a certain behavior, as well as in their potential to come up with ways to implement that. I'll give you an example, and this is something that anyone who does not have a coach also can use. It's a simple principle. It's called GROW, GROW. G stands for goal, R stands for reality, O stands for options, and W stands for the way forward. So we are asking a person who comes into a conversation, what is your goal in this coaching session? Someone may say that I get flustered when there's a lot of noise around me. Someone may say, I struggle to speak up when my manager is in the room, and I want to be more confident, I want to be calmer, whatever these goals are. What's the current reality? And this is where the analysis or the curiosity of their current behavior is, which is, how are you showing up? And ontology talks about the being in 3 dimensions, which is, it's called the Bell model, BEL, which is body, emotion, and language. So let's take the case of a person who wants to speak up more confidently in the presence of their CEO or their leader or their manager. So we want to make it as specific as possible. So this particular meeting that's coming up in this time, I want to show up in this particular way. I want to be able to make these 3 points like as specific as possible. That's the goal. Then we come to the reality, which is, what's the current situation? Forget your wish for yourself. How are you showing up right now? The person may say, I go into the meeting with a lot of things that I want to say, and then I'm listening, and now a lot of overthinking is happening on, should I say this, but if I say this, what might they say? And that's where we are becoming more curious about what's happening within the being of the person in terms of their language, which is the thoughts. If I say something wrong, I might get shouted at. And as a coach, we are helping them unpack where this is coming from. If I get shouted at, I might lose my job. Emotions. So in that moment when you're struggling to speak up, what's the emotion in the body? And then we're curious about the body. And this I've found to be particularly useful as an unlock, which is, how does the emotion show up in the body? A person may say, my chest becomes constricted, I feel my heart beating a little faster. And what happens in the coaching session is that because they are starting to speak this up, their subconscious is starting to create this as an external, as an actual reality. And then you have an access into the actual being of the person at the time when they want the desired response. And then we come to O, which is the options. So at this moment, we are helping them, first of all, center and notice what's happening. In fact, one of the founding thinkers of ontology, there's a quote where he says, we don't observe the world as it is, we observe the world as we are. So we are helping the person just notice the heart beating faster, notice the constriction in the chest, and they're actually in that moment starting to become, if this is held in a safe space, in a good coaching setup, they're starting to become more okay with this. Yeah, okay, my heart is beating faster. And when I notice it, it actually starts to relax. And at that point, the options start to unlock, which is okay. Now, what might you do differently? And then the person may say, I may take a few deep breaths, first of all. And in coaching, we're focused where coaching is different from mentorship is we're not here to give the individual the answers. We want them to uncover a new physiology, a new way of response themselves. And finally, the W, which is the way forward, which is, hey, you have that meeting on Tuesday. What are you going to do differently? And when I meet you 2 weeks from now, what must I ask you? And the person will say, ask me whether I took a deep breath. Ask me whether I made that point. Does that give you a...
No, 100%, right? And I think what's going through my mind is, we started, this question with people have, all these aspirations, which tend to be very outward goals focused. I want to achieve this, I want to publish a book and whatnot. But I think earlier also you mentioned this, whole idea of inner work. So a lot of your approach to coaching is to maybe go deeper and bring about this transformation at a, much, much more fundamental level, which eventually you are able to translate to, perform better or approach better, or maybe sometime maybe even change the goal because you have some deeper realization about what you truly want.
True. As I was driving here, I was remembering one of our ELD participants who signed up to the course wanting to be an entrepreneur and gained the clarity through the course saying, actually, like, not now. And what you often say, no does not mean never. It just means not yet. And then this person found their own path, which was a different place. Coming back to your question of, there are many different ways of coaching. I don't even know what's the label for the work that I do. Is it ontological? Is it leadership, high performance? Whatever it is for a moment. There is coaching the outer game, which is if you want to speak better, then let me train you on a certain set of skills on how do you speak better. That's more skill based. It's still both the inner game and the outer game are goal oriented. They are action focused, but the outer world coaching, if I may use that phrase, it's more technical in nature, where we are imparting the skills. Whereas working with the inner game, it's more adaptive in nature, where we are working with who the person is at this moment. And this distinction of outer game and inner game, it comes from this book, The Inner Game of Tennis, which was written by a tennis coach, Timothy Galloway, where he noticed that the tennis athletes he was coaching, one of whom was also Billie Jean King, who was one of women tennis's greatest players. He noticed that all the players in his academy more or less had the same set of skills in terms of speed, stamina, accuracy, etc. But what was setting some players apart was that they were able to play what he called the inner game really well. And he defined the inner game as having a better relationship between self one and self two. He defined self one as the inner critic who's constantly talking and saying, do this better, do that better, why didn't you speak up, you should have hit the shot better. And he defines self two as the unconscious intelligence of the body, which doesn't need to think before it acts. Several examples that he gives. In fact, one exercise, we can actually do it right now if you wish.
Will it help me become better at this podcast?
We'll tune it to that, but right now it's going to help you become a better tennis player.
Okay, sure. Given that I barely play, I can definitely...
Perfect. So imagine, and I'm just recreating an exercise that he shares. Imagine that you're holding a racket. So just go ahead and hold that as if you're... So a little outward, as if you're about to hit a stroke.
Forehand, right.
Now your aim is to generate a powerful forehand. Now I want you first to do it with tension. So tighten your wrist and now act as if you're hitting a powerful stroke.
Worried about you.
Yeah. Go ahead. Just...
All right. Here's Sriram.
Wonderful. Now the second approach is you're still wanting to generate a powerful forehand. But this time, Your arm is relaxed.
Okay.
Your arm is relaxed. Now go ahead and hit a powerful stroke. Any difference you notice on where there was more power being generated?
Yeah, so more movement of wrist and more springy action when I was relaxed.
When you were relaxed. This is exactly what he's also pointing to, which is that when we are trying to control the motion and the head is telling the body, hit a strong forehand, our muscle starts to tense. And then the power that's generated is actually not what we desire.
Yeah.
The same thing is true for going back to the example of someone who's having trouble speaking up. When there's a lot of self one doing the talking in the meeting, the body is starting to tense up and the muscles here are contracted. The breathing itself is difficult and the energy that's required to make a powerful communication is difficult. So part of coaching the inner game is helping people notice what is that particular pattern of self one and then learning to trust their own intelligence so that they can play the shot with more power or communicate with more power or make decisions with more clarity.
Got it.
I'll add one more
Yeah,
thing. Did you watch Federer's
commencement speech?
Yes,
I did. Yeah.
He said something that is he gave the facts from his own career to the inner game. He said he's played a total of 1,526 matches in his career. Of those, he's won 80% of his matches, which makes him a world champion.
Yeah.
But here's the interesting thing. He said he's only won 54% of the points that he has played in his career. And I found that striking. And I drew a few lessons from that. The first of all, to be a world champion, you need to play 1,500 matches. I remember you've said this, you miss all of the shots that you don't take. So that's the first lesson, show up 1,500 times. Second, it's okay to lose 45% of the time.
Yeah.
In fact, in order to be a world champion, you've got to be okay losing every second point.
Yeah.
And that's where the inner game starts to play up, which is every time I lose a point or as a leader, my decision last week went off or that hire didn't work, the mental talk is going to start again. And you've got to be okay knowing that probably for a really successful business leader, getting 1 out of 2 decisions right is incredible. And the third lesson I took away was he won the 54% that mattered.
Right.
He won the points that mattered. And that comes down again to staying relaxed and having the relaxed body that could deliver the best shot in those moments, is my understanding.
Yeah, and Federer always also seemed like no theatrics on the court. He seemed like very calm and composed, while he was playing pretty much throughout his career. But this brings the other point, if you look at world-class athletes in any sport, they work with a coach. You will never say, okay, Indian cricket team is going for the T20 World Cup without a coach. Like, it's unthinkable, right? But in the everyday walk of life, most of us are also trying to achieve something in our own right. We have objectives, but most people don't work with a coach. Sometimes, this whole idea of leadership coaching, maybe people who reach the peak of their profession, they're, getting to senior management, leadership, CEO role, they may think about, finding an executive coach, which I don't think is that easy to find in India. What's your perspective of, at some level, just from common sense point of view, if you want to get better, work with a teacher. If you want your kid to get better in math, you find him or her a math teacher. But the moment we graduate from college, we think now we are going to figure it out on our own, which is probably too much to ask for.
This is not just true in the world of sport. Google did a project on its internal teams and managers in 2008. It was called Project Oxygen.
Yeah.
Where they wanted to find out what separates high-performing teams from the rest of the pack. And what they found was that high-performing teams, which are defined as teams that had better satisfaction, better retention, lower attrition, and better performance, had a manager who displayed 8 attributes. And number 1 of those attributes is a good coach. So a manager who is a good coach is the first secret sauce to a high-performing team. executive coaching itself is a very young field, actually. It started in the late 80s and the early 90s, which, if you think about 2-3 centuries of the industrial revolution way of doing work and performing and output, is like we're just at the start of a new way of looking at performance in the business world. In sport, it has lasted longer, and probably in military and maybe political advisors, maybe the first coaches were Chanakya and so on. Right? So that's one. It's a young field, therefore there's only growing awareness now. And I'm seeing even in the last decade that there's a lot more awareness now. If you say you're working with a coach, then people want to know what you're working on for your growth. Whereas one of my mentors, Jim Smith, who started coaching in the 90s, executive coaching in the 90s, he tells me often, when I began coaching, I would tell people I'm a coach. They would ask me, what sport? And I would have to explain to them, no, I coach business leaders. And so we've come some ways from there. I would still say that there are some classic patterns that come in the way of what you were saying, which is, the first is asking for help. I am the first to admit that I'm not great at asking for help. And it's a pattern many of us have. We don't want to put our hand up, look vulnerable and say that here's something I don't know. I need help. We've been brought up in a culture that emphasized and rewarded having the right answer every single time, as opposed to being rewarded for just being honest and saying, I don't know how to go about it.
I want to interrupt you on that point, and this reminded me of this really cute book. I'm sure you've come across it, the Boy, the Fox, the Bull. And so in that, there is this scene where, I don't know, one character asks other, what is the bravest thing you ever done? And the answer was, asking for help. So, I mean, it does require that courage, and most of us, hold back. So I guess maybe that's one hindrance.
And on that, since you brought it up, may I ask you a question?
Sure.
What was a time when you asked for help on something, when you sought help from a coach or someone that felt difficult to do, that required your courage?
I think courage part, I don't know, but I think entrepreneurship, entrepreneurship has a way of, when things are working, and you also know when it's not working. You can't hide, behind a corporate infrastructure for too long. And when something is not working, what do you do? You have to ask for help. So whether it's from, board members or investors or my co-founders. So I think entrepreneurship kind of, at least in the work context, asking for help has become easy. So probably doesn't even more out of desperation and frustration than rather than out of courage. But I won't say that automatically translate into other walks of my life. I think there are probably areas where I could have or should have asked for help, but we hold back, we keep things bottled up and all that. So I think that's something. Mental note taken, something I need to work on. Thanks for live coaching on the camera, Sriram. But coming back to this, how I'm just thinking about we are a young country. There are a lot of young leaders. People are highly ambitious. They want to do big things in life. How should they think about, how do they even know whether I need a coach or not? What do I need a coach for? And then where do we find? And there's probably, very few Srirams in India at the moment.
There are, I've seen different numbers, and I'm also curious to find out. There are maybe 20, I don't know, maybe 2,000, maybe 20,000. I don't know what the number of executive coaches are in the country. There are several good institutions that are certifying coaches, both in India and outside. If I'm an individual listening to this podcast who really wants to make a change happen in my life, the first question of what you asked, do I need a coach? There, I would say, if I have clarity on how I'm going to go about this, or if I have the patience to let myself find the way, it's okay. Then in those circumstances, I probably don't need a coach. But if I need to fix this, or if I need to resolve this situation ASAP, it's having a huge cost. Sometimes relationships, if I'm not working on some aspect of my part in the relationship, it can have a significant cost very soon. And you'd be surprised at the number of high-performing CEOs, leaders in the business world. When I start unpacking for them where their challenge is coming from, it actually moves into the relationship domain. There's a lot that's happening in my personal life that I'm struggling to resolve, and I'm bringing that interference into my game on the court, on the business court. So how critical and urgent is it for me to resolve this pattern? And if I don't have the clarity on where to start, a coach is a good place to begin. The ICF, which is the International Coaching Federation, it's one governing body that regulates, governs, sets up the standards for the profession. They have a website where you can go online and you can look at a list of coaches in your geography. Similarly, the place I certified from, which is called the Newfield Network, which Julio Olala founded, they have a website you can go on to, and it has a list of their certified coaches. So that's how you could find a coach. And I've noticed it's a lot of word of mouth also, the field of coaching, therapy, mentorship. You want to speak to someone who has already gone through the journey. That helps a lot. And in our circles, within 1 to 2 degrees of hops, there are people that we can reach out to.
And Sriram, I imagine, for somebody, especially let's say someone in the middle stage of career, it may also be a bit expensive to find a coach. Are there good resources on the internet, something people can do on their own without investing too much money? I don't know, can GPT be a good coach for people?
I was about to say, there are, I haven't personally experimented myself with some of these coaching GPT apps, but I'm starting to hear reports from people that I coach who are also using this for their development. Just as an example, I had a coaching session yesterday with a leader who's been a social impact leader around the world and has been going through some challenges. I had given him a bunch of questions that I had asked him to journal on for self-reflection before coming into the next session. He went out on a trail. This is in the US. He went out on a solitary nature trail with his phone, and he began conversing with GPT on the questions that I had laid out for him. So he had a human coach, and he was also using GPT to go through his self-inquiry. He had an epiphany, and he reported this to me over the weekend. He said, I've had an epiphany and I need to bring it into our coaching session, because as the conversation completed with GPT on that nature trail, he sat down for an hour in silence and he had something come through that has made a lot of sense for him now. So GPT can help. I would say the combination is what I would recommend right now, which is have at least a person, a friend, if not a coach, along with what you're working with GPT on. That's one. Other resources would again be portals like ICF and Newfield that have a body of knowledge on how I go about making changes in my life. The third is a shared passion. It's something that I've always drawn inspiration from you on, which is books. So great books that can just help you coach yourself. Couple of books that I've really found helpful. The Inner Game of Tennis. Timothy Galway also wrote The Inner Game of Work. A book by Louise Hay, which says You Can Heal Your Life. It's almost a self-work book with exercises. Another book called Quiet Leadership by David Rock. I've also found that to be very helpful. So a couple of these books can also be helpful.
So the guy who went on this trail, I think one request and one question. So request is, I think you've mentioned in these prompts. I guess you've been doing prompts long before GPT, I guess, it's dependent on prompts. Can you I think as people listen to this podcast, Sriram, they will be curious, intrigued. They may want to do some of their own self-reflection. Can you help compile a list of introspective questions that maybe people know either in the solitude of their home or they can go on a trail walk or a park, they can at least reflect on, jot something down and get a taste of what does, working with somebody like Sriram look like? What kind of questions I have to grapple with? So it'll be, if you be so kind as to, give us something, and that, end of this episode, we'll just publish that with the listeners who may be keen. And the question, I think a few times in this conversation, this word silence came up. It's reminding me also of this quote that I really like. It's, it's don't, open your mouth unless you can improve upon silence. And silence is when, if you're trying to get in touch with, whatever, whether the universe is trying to tell you something or your inner voice. So only in the silence you can hear that. The benefit of going on these long solo walks is that, you are, you drown out, all the other noises from outside. I know you have done, a bunch of solo retreats. We passed nothing, then you did. And I think earlier you were sharing with me, there's this very interesting course you did at Harvard, where the class was mostly silence. Just talk about silence, Like that's an oxymoron, but don't stay silent. Talk about yeah.
So first of all, silence is not the absence of noise. I've come to understand it as the absence of mental grasping, as the absence of the mind attaching to a particular perspective. Silence in that sense to me is awareness, where I can notice. So we can talk about silence even as we are speaking, just being aware of the silence between the words that we are speaking, between the back and forth that's going on between you and me. Silence is always present. That's one. I've found silence to be powerful, and I was thrown into the deep end. So this course I was mentioning at the Kennedy School, it was taught by Professor Dean Williams in our batch. And it was created by Professor Heifetz, Ronald Heifetz. The course was titled Exercising Leadership Without Authority. And the first 4 classes of that course, the professor would walk into this amphitheater filled with about 200 people from various walks and parts of the world. It was on Tuesdays, I think at 11 a.m. he would walk in, and till 11:50 a.m. he would just stand there and say nothing. And at first, the first couple of minutes, we thought that he was preparing to say something very profound. That's usually when teachers are silent. There's something profound that's going to follow. And then we figured he has no intention to open his mouth. And
what was he, just pacing around, looking at people?
No, he was just standing there, looking around, very willing to meet your eyes and make eye contact. If you made eye contact, if you smiled,
found it creepy.
Well, I don't know what people found it, but I remember at the 3rd minute, everyone had our pens ready on the notebook to bring out the profound flow of wisdom. And then we started looking back to check if we were the only ones going through this. And we put the pen down, and one person, I remember the courageous fellow who raised his hand first, he said, Professor, we would love to hear your thoughts on leadership. And the professor looked at him and he asked him a question. He said, have you ever led in life? And this person said yes. And the professor remained silent. So we got the conclusion that we were meant to learn ourselves. But what ended up happening over 4 classes of an authority or a teacher being silent in a classroom, in a conventional relationship where students, at least in India, I have filed into classroom after classroom growing up. You sit down, open your book, knowledge transfer starts from that direction. And then in the exams, it goes back the other way. And to be thrown into this kind of an environment, the first thing I noticed was I struggled to speak up myself. It took me 9 classes to put my hand up because I was so scared of what this person or that faction would say. The second thing I noticed was when you are observing, patterns start to emerge. And in the 4th class, a student came up and he caught the podium at 11 a.m. this time before the professor could take up. And he said, today we all know the professor is not going to speak. I will set the agenda. I have noticed a few patterns. I've recorded the facts of our meetings. And I wish that every team, every business would have a person whose sole job is to notice patterns in meetings. Because what this guy shared with us was a revelation. He said, the first thing I've noticed is that 90% of the talking is being done by the whites in the room. Asians speak only when a question is asked. Every time a woman has spoken, she has been responded to by a man. And he laid out 4-5 other facts like this. And then there was civil mutiny in the class, because now the group became aware of how it was showing up. And those are lessons that I've taken away also in how we work in teams. When you sit in a meeting as a coach and you notice how the meeting is happening, you start to notice some of these patterns that in 2010, MIT and CMU did a research study on what contributes to group intelligence. They found something very interesting. They found that it was not determined by the average IQ of the group. It had nothing to do with the IQ. It was determined by 3 factors. The first was social sensitivity, which means, am I being sensitive to the other person in this group? How are they feeling as I'm asking this of them? The second factor was conversational turn-taking. They found that meetings where few people did most of the talking, those teams never performed well. Those groups didn't have great outputs. And finally, they found the third factor that determined group intelligence was the proportion of females in the group. To bring in a diversity of perspective. I'm sure the masculine intelligence is limited by definition, and therefore to have that blend. So going back, silence can reveal such patterns. You don't need to be a researcher in MIT and do a research study. You can simply be noticing the patterns that are happening. It requires that a person is not drawn into the dance and get into the fight and become part of the discussion, but actually doing both that and being on the balcony. That's what I've learned from silence. I know that you're also, you deeply value silence, walks in nature. You have a meditation room that you've shown me once. What is your relationship with silence?
It can be better. I think, if you're talking or performing or interacting, I feel like you're not thinking. And ultimately, if you are trying to create something or develop a point of view about something, you have to get in touch with your thoughts. And silence is really the only way. To be honest, I don't think I do enough of it. And if I can self-coach, if I can do more of silence and solitude in my life, I think I can do significantly better in many things that I'm currently involved in. I think the clutter is there. One thing I what Amazon has almost instituted is that all meeting starts with silence. Wow. People come into meeting, there is supposed to write this long, memo kind of thing, and people are given the printout and people just sit and for 15-20 minutes just read in silence, and the quality of discussion as a result is dramatically better. I think it's a very powerful, fertile source. Maybe a whole episode. To be honest, I actually thought about a whole episode on this idea of silence and solitude, but we'll park it to that. I want to just connect this idea of human transformation to human potential, especially in the context of where India is at. We are a very young country. Majority of the population of the country is below the age of 28. Also, it seems like our time has come. All the stars are aligned, economy doing well. There is so much optimism in the air. But part of that also requires unlocking human potential at a massive scale. There are hundreds of millions of people in the country who probably have immense potential. So I think everybody from policymakers to organization leaders to people who are today coach or who may consider becoming a coach, it's kind of imperative for everyone to not let that human potential go to waste.
So true. So much that comes up when I hear you speak about the human potential in our country. There's certainly the economic aspect of it, which I'm not even best placed to speak about, which is just jobs and people having a sense of dignity that I have a job, I'm earning something, and I'm contributing to society, which is what many people want to do. That's one aspect of it. But the other aspect is also that's one thing I noticed, the mental and emotional health that comes in the way of expressing my human potential. In India, just the generational conditioning, and this is, I read something recently and I found it fascinating. If you consider the span of human evolution on a time scale of 1 year, we left the savannah as primates only 4 or 5 days ago. If evolution started a year ago, the first civilizations would have started yesterday. The scientific revolution would have started an hour ago. And the internet age would have started just the last few eye blinks that we both have been. Why is this relevant? Because there are 2 or 3 factors that determine how we express our potential as individuals, as society. The first is inherited conditioning, either as being a species, and we have a certain inheritance around a fear of survival and fear of danger and wanting to be safe all the time. And this limits us from taking risks. But the same biology also helps us protect ourselves when there's physical danger. The truth, though, is our savanna training of 360 days, which kept us so afraid of survival and danger, no longer applies in the environment that we find ourselves in. And the first is just being aware that this is a new age, as you were saying. This is a new time in the Earth's evolution and in the evolution of human life. The second aspect is collective conditioning, cultural conditioning, socio-cultural conditioning, which is in India, we've been taught to respect our elders, and it's a very precious value that I wish that we continue and combine with respecting youth also and respecting all parts of society. What has happened, and I saw this in that Harvard course where I struggled to put my hand up and speak, we are afraid of speaking truth to power. We are afraid of expressing what we want. So many youth that I know want to do something but are afraid of what their parents might say. So many couples that are waiting to get married because their parents have not yet agreed. And it's important that we continue living as a community. I think it's what will set India's future development distinctly different from the Western model of development that we've inherited and sometimes seem to ape. This aspect of community, it's important. But being aware of that collective conditioning around the various emotions of anger, we were taught as children not to show our anger. We were taught as children not to speak about what we are afraid. And so working with that mental and emotional health, I think, is an important aspect of being able to express our human potential. And finally, loneliness, that's also something I notice. I had a coaching conversation with a CEO this morning who operates out of the US and most of the setup is in India. He was telling me, Sriram, the loneliness is brutal. It's brutal. I know that 2 weeks from now, there will be more people where I'm working, but right now I'm alone and the whole team is in India delivering to our partners and customers here. So how do we as a society, as a community, support each other through that pandemic of loneliness? This is also why we began the Habits, Happiness and Success course at IIT to give students and youth the tools and practices to overcome some of this early on in life. Thank you for asking that question. It's something that really wells me up.
So I think, Sriram, and so thank you for the work you are doing. Your approach to human development is very authentic. It's, I think, the key lessons that you draw upon are like very ancient in nature, but you also have a way of, kind of making it relatable in modern language and using the tools that people can practice. So I think the contribution you are making, towards unlocking, India's human potential through this, choosing this path of actively coaching, leaders and aspiring leaders is outstanding. So thank you so much for that. Thanks for taking the time for speaking on this podcast. And I found the conversation very good.
Thank you.
At SparX, we aim to bring to you stories of exponential impact. We share in-depth analysis of what goes behind success stories. If you find our conversations interesting, you can join us by subscribing to our YouTube channel. You can also listen to SparX on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or any other audio platform of your choice. If you have any suggestions on who we should invite or what topics we need to cover, just let us know in the comments. We are always listening, looking for ways to improve, and keep getting better as we go along.